I can't tell you exactly when it began, but looking back, it felt like a slow unraveling. It wasn't one thing. It was a series of moments, signs, and sensations, each one more unsettling than the last. If you had told me a week before that I would experience what I did that night, I would have laughed. But now, I know better. That night didn't just change my life, it changed my understanding of reality. It started innocently enough. I'd invited a friend over. She wasn't someone I knew well, just someone I'd recently met. Our conversations had been light and friendly, so when she suggested hanging out at my place, I didn't think twice. We spent hours talking, laughing, and indulging in some habits I'd come to regret. I was too distracted to notice the small shifts in her behavior at first. The first sign was her sudden silence. We had been chatting easily, and then, out of nowhere, she went quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels natural, but a heavy, oppressive quiet that seemed to suck the air out of the room. She stared ahead blankly, her eyes void of emotion. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, and the person sitting in front of me was no longer my friend. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice tinged with unease. She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her gaze locking onto mine. Her eyes were empty, yet piercing, like they could see straight through me. A chill ran down my spine. For the first time, I felt an instinctual urge to leave, but I stayed, convincing myself I was overreacting. Then she laughed. It wasn't her usual laugh, light and carefree. This laugh was guttural, almost animalistic. It sent a jolt of fear through me, and I found myself leaning back instinctively. "He's here," she whispered, her voice low and trembling. "Who's here?" I managed to ask, though every fiber of my being screamed not to. She didn't answer. Instead, she started muttering to herself, her words incomprehensible but filled with an unsettling intensity. Her movements became erratic, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. She was speaking to someone, or something that I couldn't see. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It felt heavier, oppressive, as if an invisible weight pressed down on me. The air itself seemed colder, and the faint hum of the city outside faded into silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Someone was watching us. I tried to reason with her. "Hey, you're scaring me. This isn't funny anymore." She stopped pacing and turned to face me. Her eyes, now darker than before, bore into mine. A smile spread across her face, but it wasn't a smile of joy or amusement. It was twisted, mocking, and filled with malice. "Hurry up," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Time's running out." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she began laughing again, this time louder and more unhinged. It echoed around the room, filling the space with a sound so unnatural, it felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I knew I had to leave. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to be a part of it. But every time I moved toward the door, an invisible force seemed to hold me back. It wasn't physical, but it was as real as anything I'd ever felt. "Stop," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. "This isn't you. Snap out of it." She paused, tilting her head as if considering my words. Then, with a voice that didn't belong to her, she whispered, "I'm not the one who needs to wake up." Panic set in. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. But when I looked at the screen, it was blank. No signal, no battery indicator, nothing, just a black void staring back at me. I threw the phone down in frustration, and when I looked up, she was right in front of me, her face inches from mine. "Go home," she hissed, her breath cold against my skin. "Home is that way." She pointed toward the door, but her words didn't feel like an invitation. They felt like a command, one I wasn't sure I should obey. I stumbled out of the house, the night air hitting me like a slap. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to walk. She followed me, her laughter echoing behind me like a sinister soundtrack. I turned back once, and she was there, standing under the porch light, her shadow stretching unnaturally long across the ground. "I make no deal with the devil," I muttered under my breath, the words spilling out before I even realized I was speaking. It felt like the only defense I had, and I clung to it like a lifeline. As I walked, the world around me seemed to shift. The streetlights flickered, their soft hum growing louder and more erratic. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Not by her, but by something else. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. My legs carried me aimlessly until I found myself on a stranger's porch. The rocking chair creaked softly as I sank into it, too exhausted to move any further. For a moment, I thought about knocking on the door, but what would I even say? A faint chirping broke the silence. Birds. The sound was jarring, almost out of place in the oppressive stillness of the night. But it brought with it a sliver of hope, like a light breaking through the darkness. And then I felt it. A presence. Not the malevolent force that had plagued me all night, but something entirely different. It was warm, comforting, and undeniably real. A voice, gentle and reassuring, spoke to my spirit, though I heard no words aloud. "You're not alone," it seemed to say. "This battle isn't yours to fight." Tears streamed down my face as the weight I'd been carrying all night began to lift. I whispered a prayer, the first genuine prayer I'd spoken in years. "God, if you're real, please help me. I can't do this alone." The darkness didn't vanish immediately, but it retreated, like a shadow shrinking from the light. I knew I had to go back, not to face her, but to face what had been haunting me for far longer than one night. When I returned home, she was gone. The house was eerily quiet, but the oppressive heaviness had lifted. I found myself on my knees, confessing everything, my mistakes, my fears, my doubts. For the first time, I felt free. A month later, something extraordinary happened. I was researching the name Yeshua HaMashiach, curious about its meaning. The search led me to a song, and as I played it, the presence of Jesus Christ filled the room. It was overwhelming, a love so pure and powerful it brought me to my knees once again. I repented, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming sense of gratitude. In that moment, I knew I had been given a second chance. The chains that had bound me were broken, and I was free to walk in the light. Looking back, I realized that night was a wake-up call. It wasn't just about her or the darkness that had manifested. It was about the choices I had made and the path I was on. I had invited the darkness in, but I'd also been given the opportunity to choose the light. Now I live with a renewed purpose. The fear that once held me captive has been replaced with faith, and the emptiness I felt has been filled with a love that defies understanding. I share my story not to frighten, but to remind you that there is hope. No matter how far you've strayed or how deep the darkness feels, there is a light that can pierce through it. Jesus Christ is real. He is the answer, the truth, and the life. If you seek Him with all your heart, you will find Him, just as I did. And when you do, you will never be the same.